What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're breaking down our bold predictions for every single team in the NFL for this 2020 fantasy football season. So make sure to tune in. And before we get into it, a quick reminder for everyone interested. Get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It's got everything you could want at a great value, from top 150 overall player rankings in standard and PPR formats to individual player tiers, bios, projections, along with general fantasy advice. All the details in the description. Also, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. And if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. Kicking things off, we begin with the NFC North, specifically the Chicago Bears. And the player we want to focus on here is David Montgomery, because we truly believe that out of all the sophomore running backs of note, Jacobs, Sanders, Singletary, Montgomery will have the biggest improvement in 2020 compared to 2019. The reason for this optimism? Well, let's start with the running back competition, because it doesn't really exist. Tariq Cohen is that main guy behind Montgomery, and he's more so a pass-catching specialist, a la a James White. And that translates to Montgomery having the goal line worked locked down. And that's so valuable at the running back position. On top of that, even though 2019 didn't go as we were hoping for Montgomery and the Bears, they clearly saw some upside in Montgomery and have said, expect a bigger role in this offense, and flat out, you will have more volume. And that is music to our ears. And it makes sense, because this offense should be more run-oriented with game managers at the quarterback position, whether it's Foles or Trubisky. They've still got a great defense, and those two things go hand in hand. But the thing we're most excited about for Montgomery is his current ADP as a 5th or 6th round running back. And he's still someone that's a true workhorse guy without competition and huge RB1 upside. It's unheard of to really get that type of value that late in drafts. For that reason, we are all in on Montgomery in 2020. Next, looking at the Green Bay Packers, let's focus in on Aaron Jones, because he was a breakout last season, had a huge year, and we told you to target him. Finished as the number 2 running back in PPR formats, some huge games, but also a bit of a roller coaster ride. And that's in part why we're worried here, because naturally now he's an RB1 being drafted in the 2nd round, maybe even in the 1st round, depending on your league size and formats. But the Green Bay Packers, some worrying tendencies. They've got a bit of a running back by committee there with guys like Jamal Williams, the newly added Dillon, and also Jones was pretty inconsistent last year. Now, sure, he led all running backs in combined touchdowns, but we say this every single year, touchdown regression happens. It's one of the categories that has the most variability on a year-to-year basis, so expect a bit of a decline there. Also, there were flat out several games where Aaron Jones had under 10 fantasy points, where he was outscored by Jamal Williams, and where he was just incredibly touchdown dependent. On top of that, a lot of his success did come through the air, but let's not forget Davante Adams was injured. So with a fully healthy Davante Adams for 16 games here, Aaron Jones should see a bit of a decline in 2020 in that category. For all these reasons, we would rather pass on Jones, as we don't see any way that he finishes as the RB2 again in 2020. Next, we've got the Minnesota Vikings, and let's focus in on the running back again here in Dalvin Cook, because Cook was a guy that maybe some people weren't sold on last year, but we told you he could go ahead and be one of the biggest steals in your drafts, and if you listen to us, it paid off. And again, we're saying the same thing in 2020. Now, sure, Cook is being drafted in the 1st round, but we still think that there's a bit of value to take advantage of, because some people are concerned about several things. Injury history with Cook. They're concerned about the fact that, he was potentially going to hold out, things like that. All those things were overplayed, and he's healthy right now, so we're projecting him to be just that. And when that is the case, we see him as a tier 1 running back. In the category of a Saquon Barkley and an Ezekiel Elliott. We, in fact, have him as our 4th overall running back. And the fact is, without Stephon Diggs, expect an increase in pass catching, where he already had 50-plus receptions last year on 14 games played. And he's that rare combination that can get you 1,200, 1,300 rushing yards and 50, 60 receptions. That'll put you, like we said, in the Barkley and Zeke category. So again, right now, the 4th, 5th pick overall, we think Dalvin Cook should be that no-brainer guy that you guys get yet again. And finally, the Detroit Lions. Let's focus in on the running back again here, specifically DeAndre Swift, because he was a highly touted rookie, by many the top rookie running back in this year's draft. But he goes ahead and lands with the Detroit Lions. You've already got a Kerryon Johnson there, and even though he's been a bit disappointing, we still think that when it comes to rookies this year, specifically rookie running backs, they're behind the 8 ball because there's no preseason. You don't really have that chemistry, and you won't have the ability to get a leg up on that veteran competition. For that reason, we think that this backfield with Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift is one to avoid fully. And for the most part, that's our recommendation for almost every rookie running back, obviously with the exception of CEH. But DeAndre Swift is completely a pass for us in 2020, no matter the hype that he had coming out of college. Moving on to the NFC South, we start with the Atlanta Falcons, where we want to highlight Calvin Ridley. And truthfully speaking, we're so high on this offensive unit as far as it being a top 5 group in fantasy that we can go ahead and focus in on any one of these guys, from the quarterback to the running back to the wide receiver to the tight end. But Ridley is the guy that stands out because he falls in that Chris Godwin wide receiver breakout category for 2020. He's entering his 3rd season playing opposite a top 3 wide receiver in Julio Jones, and has an MVP quarterback throwing him the football on an offense that was number 1 in the entire NFL in 2019 in terms of pass attempts. All that translates to a lot of opportunities on a pass-heavy offense for Ridley in 2020. He's always excelled in the touchdown department, which further increases his ceiling. Right now, going right around the 4th round for an upside top 10 wide receiver, which we firmly believe in. Plays the Bucks and the Saints each twice a year. Those will be very high scoring affairs. We love the NFC South as far as fantasy gold mines are concerned in 2020. And Ridley should have one of the biggest benefits in that department as he continues to lessen the gap between himself and Julio Jones. Next, we've got the New Orleans Saints, and here we want to focus in on Michael Thomas. And flat out, our prediction is, even though Thomas is being drafted across all formats as the number 1 wide receiver, is that he will not finish the year this way. In fact, he'll probably finish outside of the top 3. And this isn't anything against Michael Thomas. I mean, you almost have to rank him as the number 1 guy heading into the drafts, because last season, over 1,700 receiving yards. He set a record in terms of receptions, and it was incredibly consistent. But keep in mind, the Saints are also getting a healthy Alvin Kamara back, who missed some time last season. He's an integral part to this pass-catching attack, also adding Emmanuel Sanders, a very solid wide receiver too, that goes ahead and racks up receptions as well. For that reason, we think those categories will probably decrease quite a bit for Michael Thomas. He'll kind of come back down to earth, and for that reason, we project that there's a very good chance that he'll finish outside of the top 3 wide receivers in 2020 fantasy. Moving on, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and here we're focusing on the wide receiver group with Evans and Godwin. Last season, both top 10 wide receivers in fantasy, and guess what? We think they're going to do it again. We're doubling down on it, both Evans and Godwin. In fact, we have Evans ranked higher on this offense, and it'll probably be behind a top 10 effort in terms of Tom Brady as fantasy quarterbacks are concerned. This is the best group of pass catchers he has ever had in his career, Evans, Godwin. And let's not get started with the tight ends, Gronk, OJ Howard, and Bray. This will be a very high scoring offense with more stability and consistency than it had last year with Jameis Winston. Bruce Arians will give you the green light to go ahead and air it out. And we think that Evans and Chris Godwin will go ahead, take full advantage. Evans has got that touchdown upside. Godwin, more maybe of that PPR type of wide receiver. Either way, in this NFC South, again, that's loaded as far as pass opportunities and scoring opportunities. We like both these guys incredibly. Finally, we have got the Carolina Panthers, and here the focus has to be Christian McCaffrey, because this team has pretty much gotten an entire facelift from quarterback to head coach to defense. And the one big consistent is Christian McCaffrey. Sure, DJ Moore is nice, but McCaffrey is the name to know because last season he was the fantasy darling of the year. Only the 3rd ever running back to join the 1,000 yard club with 1,000 yards receiving and 1,000 yards rushing. Guess what? We think he can go ahead and do it again in 2020, as crazy as that sounds. This offensive line is not good, but there's no opposition to Christian McCaffrey. We think he'll go ahead and get you over 1,000 yards rushing. And as far as pass catching goes, he's the best pass catcher on this offense. We think Robbie Anderson will take away a lot of opportunities from DJ Moore. Teddy Bridgewater usually gets rid of the football pretty quickly. Christian McCaffrey will be a huge benefactor to this. You can line him up anywhere. He presents mismatches. For that reason, we think he's got another RB1 type of year in him with another 1K season. Next, getting to the NFC East, we start with the New York Giants, where we focus in on Evan Ingram, who we believe will be a top 5 tight end in 2020. In fact, Ingram was on that pace last season prior to his injury, where he missed half the year. But guess what? If you extrapolate his stats, he would have had over 900 yards receiving with between 6 and 8 touchdowns, which would have put him in that elite category of the top 5 guys last year. And right now, at his current value between the 6th and 8th round, he's an absolute steal. Yes, there's an injury history there. We realize that. But guess what? These big name guys, it happens for a while, a couple years, but then they go ahead and break that streak, a la Keenan Allen, a la a Dalvin Cook. We think Ingram can be that next guy. And on an offense where he's a mismatch at that tight end position for so many defenders, and he can be that safety valve for Daniel Jones on an offense that airs it out, we're extremely excited for Ingram. The sky is the limit for him. Next, the Dallas Cowboys. Here we want to focus in on Dak Prescott, who by all accounts had a breakout year last season. Almost 5,000 yards passing, the number 2 quarterback only behind Lamar Jackson in fantasy. But guess what? In 2020, we are pumping the brakes on Prescott because we believe he will finish outside of the top 5 scoring quarterbacks. Currently, we have got Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan, and Russell Wilson in those categories. Yes, the Cowboys added some nice talent in CeeDee Lamb. They've got Gallup, they've got Amari Cooper, but their identity is Ezekiel Elliott and that rushing attack. They win as a team when Ezekiel Elliott gets it going. This really isn't against Dak Prescott, anything like that. It's more so the situation and the field of quarterbacks he has to contend with. But for that reason, right now, we think he's being slightly overdrafted, and we would go ahead and pass on him in 2020. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles next, and here we want to focus in on the 2 tight ends in Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert because we predict that both these guys will be top 10 tight ends in 2020 fantasy. In fact, they actually quietly did this last season. Ertz top 5, while Goddard finished at that 10th spot. But many of you are probably rolling your eyes because you're thinking, well, the Eagles added so many pass-catching options. Miles Sanders will improve. But quietly, Marquise Goodwin opts out. Alshon Jeffrey struggling with injuries. Jalen Reagor still a rookie. No preseason. He'll probably be playing, a little bit slower than expected. While those tight ends, favorite targets of Carson Wentz, we think they will be all reliable on this offense. And both those guys will have top 10 upside in 2020. Finally, getting to the Washington Redskins, here it's pretty simple. We think this is an offense to avoid, but we specifically want to focus in on Dwayne Haskins because we think he's going to go ahead and get benched this season. Sure, maybe he starts out as the guy, and a guy that you want to keep in mind here is Terry McLaurin because he's pretty much the only viable option on this offense. But we'd go ahead and pass on any single guy as far as fantasy is concerned on this Washington team until there is a quarterback change, which we believe will happen, and Kyle Allen will become the guy. And at that point in time, all of these offensive weapons should be elevated by a little bit. In the NFC West, we start with the San Francisco 49ers, where we predict for a run-heavy team like them that actually they will not have a single running back finish in the top 20. Yes, you heard us right. Neither Raheem Mostert or Tevin Coleman will be top 20 fantasy scoring running backs. The fact of the matter is there's too much new talent, too many sophomore running backs that are improving and guys returning from injury that we think that Mostert and Coleman won't be valid options. In fact, both these guys pretty much cannibalize their own opportunities. You're going to have major ups and downs from them. The main guy that you want to own on this offense, probably George Kittle. Maybe one of these running backs can go ahead and be a low-end RB2, but as far as the top 20 running backs are concerned, we don't like any of the San Francisco running backs. It's a running back by committee written all over it, so we'd go ahead and pass on the rushing attack for the 49ers. Moving on to the Arizona Cardinals, here we want to focus in on Kenyon Drake because we see Drake as the Dalvin Cook of 2020. Right now, going in the early second round potentially, but we love his upside. No more David Johnson. Kenyon Drake is a very well-balanced running back, both as a pass catcher and as a rusher. And since he joined the Cardinals last season, he did great for them versus some tough opposition in the San Francisco 49ers, if y'all remember, and put together some pretty good rushing performances. And on an offense right now with another breakout candidate in Kyler Murray, on a high-scoring offense with Cliff Kingsbury at the helm, with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, we think that all things will fall in place for Kenyon Drake, and he will have a top 5 upside type of potential season like Cook did last year. Next, we've got the LA Rams, and here there's a lot of love for that tight end spot in Tyler Higbee, but guess what? We are completely passing on Higbee. Yes, he had a great end of the year, but let's keep in mind that you also had Brandon Cooks struggling to stay healthy and Gerald Everett gone for the entire year. And if all these people truly believe that the Rams will be running more 2 tight end sets with Higbee and Ingram, don't you think that both those guys will take away opportunities from each other? You've still got Kupp and Robert Woods, Josh Reynolds potentially to replace Brandon Cooks. For that reason, we think that Tyler Higbee at his current ADP, valued as a top 10 tight end, and maybe by some as a tier 2 guy, will go ahead and disappoint more people than you expect. Finally, we have got the Seattle Seahawks, and here, focusing in on the tight end once again, the addition of Greg Olsen, we think, is a great one for Seattle. Yes, there's a long list of tight ends there, but maybe the main competition to Olsen in Disley will go ahead and start the season on the PUP list. That will open things up for Olsen, who's probably the most experienced pass catcher on this team. He proved last season, if it wasn't for Cam Newton getting injured, he was going to have a pretty good year. He can still get it done. He's an excellent receiving threat. He's very reliable. Russell Wilson likes his tight ends. The problem is they've struggled to stay healthy. Olsen finally stayed healthy last year. If he can go ahead and do it again for the Seattle Seahawks, we believe that Olsen will surprise some people in 2020. Shifting gear to the AFC, we begin with the AFC North, specifically the Baltimore Ravens. And here we want to highlight Mark Ingram because even though Ingram was a pleasant surprise last year, a top 10 finish in standard formats behind that great offensive year of the Ravens and MVP Lamar Jackson, most likely 2020 will be very different and not in a good way because right now the deck is stacked against Ingram. Last year, he had a lot of success in overall touchdowns at the running back position, 15 combined touchdowns. We've said it before, there will be decrease here, most likely regression. There's a lot of variability in that department. And consider the fact that Ingram only got barely above 200 rush attempts on the season. There's just not enough volume on this team. He has to contend with the actual best running back on the roster, and that is Lamar Jackson on a down-by-down basis. Every single time he's on the field, he's not an every down back anymore, and that should go ahead and be supported by the drafting of J.K. Dobbins in the second round by the Ravens. Dobbins is the future at the running back position. Right now, we just cannot trust Mark Ingram to be a reliable running back in 2020. Next, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers, where we want to go ahead and highlight James Conner. Yes, Conner was incredibly disappointing last season, being drafted in the first round and then absolutely disappearing. But guess what? Last season with no Big Ben is a complete wash for every single offensive player on the Steelers. But now, James Conner, fully healthy, he has RB1 upside again behind a great offensive line, behind a very high scoring offense when Big Ben is there. The last time Big Ben was on the field for a full year in 2018, he was a top 3 fantasy quarterback. He led the entire league in passing yards, even more so than MVP Patrick Mahomes. The point is, this offense in Big Ben produces a lot of scoring opportunities. James Conner is a very good pass catcher, very good dual threat running back. He should excel across all formats. And if he stays healthy the majority of the season, he is incredible value right now in the 4th, 5th round because he is the true workhorse running back on this offense. Next, we move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, where here we want to look at A.J. Green, who we believe will be one of the best value late round wide receivers in your draft. Yes, again, is there an injury history? Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why AJ Green is available so late in drafts. He didn't play a single game last season, but there's going to be more quarterback stability with Joe Burrow. And when we've actually seen AJ Green on the field for a prolonged period of time, he's a top 10 wide receiver. The upside right now is so high. The reward outweighs the risk in our eyes. And if he stays healthy for this season, the gamble isn't all that much, whereas the upside is a wide receiver one. So we love targeting AJ Green in late round drafts. Finally, we have got the Cleveland Browns, where we want to shed some light on Odell Beckham. Now, again, Odell was a wide receiver that incredibly disappointed last year, barely got over 1,000 yards receiving, but by all accounts was outproduced by Jarvis Landry in every single category. But now, heading into 2020, Odell is on record saying that he's finally healthy. Another year on this offense. The Browns have incredibly improved their offensive line, and Jarvis Landry being on the PUP list to begin here, well, that's a huge bump up for Odell's stock. We believe that he's going to go ahead and have massive targets, and he's going to return to being a prominent wide receiver one in that tier one category. So right now, we'd go ahead and buy all that Odell stock that we can. Moving on to the AFC South, we start with the Indianapolis Colts. And the storyline here is obviously the addition of Phillip Rivers, but we want to focus in more so what this does for T.Y. Hilton and Jack Doyle, because we think both these guys will be a wide receiver one and tight end one upside wise in the respective rankings, because last season Phillip Rivers had 4,600 passing yards, and that's a stark difference to what the Colts had at that position with Jacoby Brissett. Because with Rivers now in town, he'll probably have that ceiling, that mark of right around 4,500 yards yet again, with a great offensive line, with an established rushing attack that will set things up further for the passing attack. T.Y. Hilton has proven before, when healthy, when on the field, he is a wide receiver one. Right now, tremendous value for him. And Jack Doyle, probably the second best pass catcher on this team. We know what Rivers does with his tight ends. He targets them a bunch. Antonio Gates, Hunter Henry. Both these guys will benefit tremendously and have huge upside for 2020. Next, we've got the Houston Texans, and here obviously the big storyline is the departure of DeAndre Hopkins and the presumed number one wide receiver, Will Fuller. But guess what? We are all on the Brandon Cooks bandwagon, and we have been screaming that at the top of our lungs for several months now. The ADP for Cooks, unfortunately, has gone up, so the public is starting to come around, but still there's tremendous value there, because even though Cooks has an injury history, concussions definitely a problem last season, forced him to miss some time. Guess what? Will Fuller is actually the most injury-riddled wide receiver on this team by far. In his career so far in the NFL, he has never played a full NFL season. And prior to last year, Cooks was a perennial 1,000-plus yard wide receiver year in and year out. We think he can go ahead, do a lot of the things that Will Fuller does just as well. He's got the speed. He can go ahead, in terms of pass catching wise, go ahead and put together a high yardage type of ceiling and become that next best wide receiver for Deshaun Watson. We love the upside and think that Cooks should be the wide receiver to own in Houston. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Leonard Fournette here. A lot of people expect a regression here for Fournette. He was so great. 76 receptions last year. Absolutely amazed people in that category. But we've been saying that Fournette is an underrated pass catcher for a while now. Now, sure, there will probably be some regression there, but guess what? He's still probably good for about 50-plus receptions, and we think this will probably be his last season with the Jaguars, so they'll likely go ahead and use him extensively as a rusher purely on top of that, and that's going to go ahead and provide a pretty good floor for him, both in standard and in PPR leagues. Right now, being drafted anywhere from the 3rd to the 4th round. He's got good RB1 upside. We really like Fournette again in 2020. And finally, the Tennessee Titans. And while we think that this offense will face regression, and guys like Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown could disappoint, the name to know is probably Jonnu Smith, the tight end here, because right now we think he has the highest upside out of any offensive player due to a combination of his ADP and what he can go ahead and produce, because outside of A.J. Brown, who are you going to trust on this offense? It's not going to be Corey Brown, who we've been waiting to go ahead and develop, and it just hasn't happened. Derrick Henry isn't much of a pass catcher. Jonnu Smith really showed some upside. He comps well to an Eric Ebron from a couple years ago when he really excelled in the touchdown department for the Indianapolis Colts. And right now, going towards the 20th overall tight end, Jonnu Smith has some crazy upside in 2020. Looking at the AFC East, we begin with the New England Patriots, where we believe that Cam Newton will be a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 2020. Right now, he's being drafted outside of the top 15 usually, and being more so viewed as a backup quarterback. But guess what? Cam Newton has been there. He's done it before, and now he's in a perfect situation. He's in a one-year prove-it deal, basically playing for his NFL life. Because right now, he needs to go ahead and produce. We expect him to be the week 1 starter and play the majority of the season for the Patriots. And we know that the Patriots, coaching staff-wise, they play to their players' strength. So you know that Cam will still have that high floor in terms of what he can do with his legs. And when healthy, which is the case right now for Cam Newton, and also extremely motivated, well, he's always been a perennial top 10 quarterback. We absolutely love the value. The weapons are there. Don't let people dissuade you, because think about this. His MVP campaign with the Panthers a couple years ago, his pass catching options were guys like Devin Funchess, guys like Corey Brown, Ted Ginn. And now compare that to Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, N'Keal Harry, and guys like Sony Michel, Lamar Miller, and James White. I'll go ahead and go with the New England bunch. I love the upside for Cam Newton. I think he's going to have a big comeback type of year and remind people that he has a lot left in the tank. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins, here we highlight Devontae Parker because a lot of people are a bit shaky on him still. But let's not forget he had an absolute sensational end to the season for the Dolphins last year, and we predict he's going to have that type of season for the entirety of 2020, a top 12 type of wide receiver this year with some more expected quarterback stability, with Ryan Fitzpatrick probably being the quarterback for the majority of the season because Tua might go ahead and just sit out this year. He's really starting behind the 8 ball here in terms of practice, in terms of chemistry, and with guys like Hearns and Wilson opting out, Devontae Parker should see plenty of opportunities, combined with the fact that the Dolphins will probably be playing from behind a bunch. They don't really have a rushing attack established, so that means a lot of volume for Devontae Parker. Moving on to the New York Jets, we predict that unfortunately this will probably be one of the bottom of the barrel offenses this season, which means there won't be a single top 15 fantasy player at any position on this team, from quarterback to running back to wide receiver to tight end. Le'Veon Bell probably has the best shot to do this, specifically in PPR formats, but with that offensive line being what it is, and with Sam Darnold not taking that next step, we're going to go ahead and bet on the latter in terms of him finishing outside of that category. And all in all, this will probably be one of the worst offenses and worst teams in 2020. Finally, looking at the Buffalo Bills, obviously the big news for them was the addition of Stephon Diggs, and naturally a lot of people are excited. But guess what? We predict that John Brown will be the wide receiver to own and will actually outproduce Stephon Diggs. Because Stephon Diggs last season in standard formats actually finished as the 18th overall wide receiver. Guess who was right behind him? John Brown. Only separated by 70 yards receiving. And John Brown had 9 more receptions, 6 touchdowns for both. In PPR formats, John Brown was the 20th overall wide receiver, while Stephon Diggs was the 24th overall. Consider that John Brown has more chemistry with someone like Josh Allen, and that he'll probably be good for another 1,000 yards receiving because of what he excels at and the type of offense that Josh Allen prioritizes. Well, we love the upside here. That chemistry has not been developed between Allen and Stephon Diggs. John Brown has had more experience in this offense. Diggs there will go ahead and open things up more so for Brown. So go ahead, invest a pick in Brown, probably more so than Diggs for the Bills in 2020. Finally, getting to the AFC West, we start with the Kansas City Chiefs, and specifically Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because obviously his stock skyrocketed after the Damian Williams opt-out news. But with the door being open for him to be the guy, now Our prediction is that Clyde Edwards-Helaire will have a top 5 running back type of season, similar to Saquon Barkley in his rookie year. When you consider that the upside here on this incredible high-scoring offense, maybe one of the best units in the NFL, if not the best, with the best quarterback in the NFL and a head coach that has produced numerous top 10 running backs, guys like Jamal Charles, Kareem Hunt, Brian Westbrook, and DeMarco Murray, you have to get excited about the opportunity for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, not only as a rusher, but also as a pass catcher. He has a very high touchdown upside, and we are all in on this rookie for 2020. Moving on to the LA Chargers here with the departure of Phillip Rivers, it's tough to really trust anyone, but a guy in Hunter Henry that's still somewhat viewed as a tier 2 tight end, we are passing on. We believe that he will finish outside of the top 10 in that category. Right now, we don't know what you're going to get at the quarterback position. Will you have stability, or will Justin Herbert enter the picture at some point in time? And even with Hunter Henry still there, there's so many other weapons like a Keenan Allen, like an Austin Eckler, like a Mike Williams, and the rushing ability of a Tyrod Taylor. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and pass on Hunter Henry for some other guys in that tier 2 category, someone like an Evan Ingram or maybe a Jack Doyle that we mentioned earlier. Next, we've got the Denver Broncos, and for them, the big addition was Melvin Gordon. And we said it since he signed with the Broncos that this is one of the worst landing spots for Melvin Gordon. We still love the player, but we hate the situation. In fact, we're predicting that Gordon finishes the season with less than 1,000 yards rushing. Sure, he might go ahead and start out the year as the primary running back. We believe that Phillip Lindsay will go ahead and normalize his role in that offense more so as the season progresses. And there's still a huge question mark there in Drew Lock. If he doesn't continue to progress, this will be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Their offensive line projects to be one of the worst in the league. And if they're playing from behind often, they're going to have to abandon the rush. For that reason, we are passing on Gordon this year. Finally, we have got the Las Vegas Raiders. And even though the Raiders made some moves at the wide receiver position, and we expect improvements from a Williams, from a Renfro, and additions like Henry Ruggs to contribute, we still believe that Darren Waller will be the leading pass catcher for this team yet again. We view him as a very high upside top 5 tight end, especially in PPR formats. He proved that he can get it done. He has that connection with Derek Carr, and we love him in the 5th or 6th round in fantasy drafts in 2020. So with that, we conclude our team-wide predictions for every single squad in this 2020 fantasy football season. And let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? Do you have other bold predictions of your own for these teams that we mentioned, along with any other fantasy questions? And as always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com for some exclusive content. Get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. All the details in the description, but a great value with everything you could possibly want. And in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.